I kept saying it long before anything in my outer world shifted, long before any number matched a ticket, long before anyone believed me, long before I even fully believed myself. I repeated it in the silence of the night and in the noise of the day. My life is unfolding in my favor. Everything I desire is already choosing me. I didn't say it to force reality. I didn't say it to beg the universe. I said it to remind myself of who I truly am, a creator, not a seeker. And slowly, something subtle began to happen. My inner conversations transformed. My reactions softened. My expectations shifted. I stopped looking at circumstances as if they were authorities over my destiny. I began treating them as shadows cast from a deeper place, my state of being. Every time doubt whispered, I answered it with that simple inner sentence. Every time fear tried to seduce me back into old patterns, I stood still inside the feeling of already receiving. It wasn't about the lottery. It wasn't about the numbers. It was about alignment, dominion, and the quiet decision to accept that what I desired was already mine in the unseen. People look at the 8 wins and think the magic was in the tickets. But the magic was in the shift. The moment I stopped waiting for evidence and began living from the end. I woke up each morning with a calm conviction. Not excitement, not anxiety, conviction. A soft certainty that life was rearranging itself in ways I couldn't yet see. I kept saying it when nothing changed. I kept saying it when everything seemed opposite. I kept saying it because it wasn't a sentence. It was a state. Each repetition carved new assumptions. Each repetition dissolved the old identity that believed blessings had to be earned instead of accepted. And then it happened. Not once, not twice. 8 times reality reflected my inner world back to me. Not because I chased it, but because I finally became the person for whom such abundance was natural. The outer winds were only symbols, reminders, reflections of an internal victory that had already taken place. The real lottery wasn't the money. It was the realization that when you persist in the inner story, the outer world bows to it. That when you claim a state consistently enough, boldly enough, quietly enough, it hardens into fact. I kept saying it. I kept feeling it. I kept living inside its truth. And the world, faithful as always, returned it to me multiplied. I kept saying it not as a chant, not as a ritual, but as a quiet inner knowing that I refuse to abandon. There is a point when words stop being words and become the atmosphere you breathe. They become the environment of your mind, the soil from which your reality grows. That sentence became my inner climate. It was the current beneath every thought. And even when my senses showed me nothing but repetition, routine, and the same old circumstances, something deeper in me knew the shift had already begun. I realized that life does not change when the evidence appears. Life changes when the inner story changes. The outer world is not the initiator. It is the follower. It is the echo of your persistent assumption. So each day, even when the world presented me with reasons to doubt, I returned to my chosen sentence, to the feeling that it implied. I wasn't chasing luck. I was stepping into identity. I was stepping into the version of myself who naturally received, naturally attracted, naturally lived in abundance without strain, without struggle, without waiting. I stopped trying to predict the how. I stopped asking when. I stopped measuring my progress based on physical proof. Instead, I allowed myself to feel the outcome as if it had already unfolded. I walked through my home as though life had already shifted. I sat in silence and let that feeling wash over me until it no longer felt like imagination. It felt like memory. a memory from a future that was already formed, already complete, already mine. The more I lived in that inner reality, the more the old version of me dissolved. I didn't worry about what made sense. I didn't argue with logic. I didn't let statistics intimidate me. I didn't let anyone else's disbelief become my truth. I understood that every extraordinary outcome is ordinary to the one living in alignment. And I was aligning from the inside out. Thoughts became choices. Feelings became decisions. I decided what I would accept, what I would embody, what I would assume as natural for me. And every time fear rose, I met it with calm certainty. I reminded myself that the unseen is always more real than the seen, because the unseen is where creation begins. Slowly, I watched my reactions transform. Situations that once would have made me anxious no longer moved me. I reacted from the version of myself who already had what I desired. I carried myself as though the outcome had been guaranteed from the beginning. And that simple shift, responding from the end rather than to the present, opened doors I didn't even know existed. The lottery was only one of the symbols. Yes, I won 8 times, but those wins were not separate miracles. They were reflections of one continuous state of consciousness, a state in which abundance was not an event, it was a nature. The world was simply delivering what I had already accepted within myself. People always ask what I told myself, what I repeated, what I believed. They want the words, but the power was never in the words. The power was in the feeling behind the words. The words were the anchor, the access point, the doorway. But the feeling of inevitability, of naturalness, of quiet certainty, that was the true cause behind everything that manifested. I stopped treating desire as something distant. I stopped seeing myself as someone trying to reach a goal. Instead, I became the one who already had it. I stopped trying to climb. I chose to arrive. When I held the end in my mind with enough persistence, life rearranged itself effortlessly. Opportunities aligned, steps unfolded, paths illuminated themselves. What seemed impossible became predictable. What once felt rare became normal. It wasn't luck that brought those wins. It was alignment. It was the decision to assume abundance so deeply that the world had no choice but to comply. The world always mirrors the dominant inner state, and my dominant inner state became one of overflowing certainty. Every day I returned to that feeling. Every day I lived from it, not forcing, not hoping, just knowing. The same way you know the sun will rise, the same way you know gravity works, the same way you know your next breath will come. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't impatience. It was simply truth to me. And once that truth settled in my being, the winds came as naturally as sunrise. They came not as surprises, but as confirmations. They came not as moments of shock, but as reflections of what I had already accepted. My inner world had shifted first, and the physical world followed faithfully. I kept saying it because every repetition carved a deeper path into my consciousness. Every repetition solidified a new identity. Every repetition reminded me that I am the operant power, the one who assigns meaning, the one who shapes experience. My words were the blueprint, but my state was the architect. And once that state became stable, everything external had to match it. Even now, I understand that the true victory wasn't the winnings. It was the mastery of inner direction. It was the realization that anything can be reshaped from within, that circumstances have no authority over the one who chooses their inner state deliberately, that life bends to the one who persists in the unseen until it becomes undeniable in the seen. And so I continued, not striving, not pushing, simply assuming, accepting, and allowing. The world rearranged itself around my certainty, just as it always will for anyone who claims their desire from the end. I kept living inside that inner certainty until it no longer felt like something I was practicing, and instead felt like something I was. It became as natural as breathing. There was no effort left in it, no tension, no waiting for something to happen. I had crossed a quiet threshold within myself where desire and fulfillment fused into one seamless state. I was no longer imagining the end, I was living from it. The world around me still looked the same for a while, same days, same routines, same noise, same responsibilities. But inside, everything had changed. And that is always how it begins. The inner world shifts long before the outer one catches up. But the outer world is faithful. It always bends to the inner pattern that is held with consistency. People often think manifestation is about intensity, or emotions, or dramatic rituals. But what truly creates change is not intensity, it is persistence. It is the quiet, steady decision to return to the truth of your desire, no matter what your senses present. I learned that the senses are not enemies, they are simply late reporters. They show up after the fact, after the state has already been accepted. And once I understood that, I stopped waiting for proof. I stopped looking for signs. I stopped checking anything outside of me. The inner feeling was the only confirmation I needed. There were days when my mind tried to pull me back into the old patterns, days when the world seemed stubbornly unchanged. But each time those thoughts tried to reclaim me, I responded with stillness. I reminded myself that I was not trying to make anything happen. I was simply choosing who I was being. And who I was being, internally, had nothing to do with the circumstances around me. That was the real power, not reacting, not wavering, not negotiating with doubt. I discovered that doubt only has power when you entertain it, and fear only grows when you feed it. When you refuse to engage, these old states lose their grip. They crumble, not because you fight them, but because you stop giving them attention. My chosen sentence became my stabilizer. Whenever the world tried to pull me into old assumptions, I returned to that inner statement like someone returning home. I said it in my mind with gentleness, not desperation. I didn't shout it. I didn't force it. I simply allowed it to settle inside me like a quiet truth. My life is unfolding in my favor. Everything I desire is already choosing me. Those words carried a frequency of completion. They implied the end. They implied inevitability. They implied that I wasn't chasing anything. I was aligning with something that already existed. And the more I settled into that truth, the more natural it felt. I noticed that my emotional reactions softened. My habits shifted. My assumptions restructured themselves. I was no longer living in anticipation. I was living in embodiment. I started to notice subtle changes in how I interpreted life. Events that once would have frustrated me now seemed irrelevant. Delays no longer felt like obstacles. Setbacks no longer felt personal. Everything became neutral because I no longer measured anything against what I desired. My desire was already fulfilled within me, so no external condition had the power to contradict it. This was the key. I stopped letting the world tell me who I was. I told the world who I was, and eventually it reflected it. The first lottery win didn't shock me. It felt familiar, almost expected. It was a reflection of the state I had been living in. When I saw the numbers align, I didn't explode with excitement. I inhaled a deep, calm breath and thought, of course, this is natural for me. That response came not from arrogance, but from alignment. The second win came easier than the first. By that time, my inner state had become even more stable. I understood that the physical event wasn't something I had to chase or manipulate. It was simply the outer world responding to my inner identity. When it happened again, I smiled, not because of the money, but because I could see the invisible laws moving, rearranging, obeying the pattern of my assumptions. By the third and fourth wins, I no longer entertained surprise. The world had become fluid to me, flexible, responsive. I realized deeply that material things are not solid or rigid, they are expressions of consciousness. And consciousness, when directed with clarity and persistence, reshapes everything in its path. By the fifth win, I began to understand something profound. Abundance is not something you attract. Abundance is something you identify with. When you identify with it, the world organizes itself around that identity. Opportunities magnetize, paths unfold, synchronicities multiply. Not because you are lucky, but because you are aligned. The sixth and seventh wins came at moments when I wasn't even thinking about the lottery. I wasn't checking tickets with anticipation. I wasn't waiting for anything. I had fully stepped into the state of someone who naturally receives miracles as part of daily life. They weren't miracles anymore, they were reflections. Just as a mirror doesn't choose what to show, but simply reflects what stands before it, reality reflected my inner being with precision. By the eighth win, I had already learned the real lesson: the external doesn't matter if the internal is unwavering. The money was useful, yes. It opened doors, created freedom, and expanded possibilities. But it wasn't the money that changed me. I had changed long before the money arrived. The real transformation was in the mastery of my inner dialogue. The victory was over the old self that believed circumstances were stronger than consciousness. The triumph was the realization that everything in life comes from within. Not some things, not occasionally, everything. What I discovered through those wins was that reality responds to the tone of your inner conversations. It responds to the assumptions you carry lightly but firmly. It responds to the identity you choose in silence. The world is not shaped by effort or struggle, but by the quiet internal acceptance of a new truth. And once that truth becomes dominant, once it becomes your natural state, the world has no choice but to reflect it with exactness. I lived in that truth until it became my atmosphere. I breathed it. I rested in it. I trusted it with a trust that required no physical evidence. And because of that, the evidence came in overflowing measure. Even now, I continue to shape my life from within. Not by force, not by demand, but by assumption. I learned that assumption is creation. That imagination is the blueprint. That identity is destiny. And the outer world bends to the one who masters these inner laws. I kept saying it. I kept feeling it. I kept living from it. And the world delivered again and again, exactly as I had assumed. And so, if there is anything to take from my journey, let it be this: nothing in your life is waiting to change. It is waiting for you to change your state. The moment you dare to claim the end as your truth, the moment you decide that what you desire is already yours, the world begins its silent rearrangement. Do not chase outcomes. Do not beg for signs. Do not measure your progress by what your eyes can see. Stand firm in the reality you choose within, and let the outer world follow in its own time. You are not at the mercy of circumstances. Circumstances are at the mercy of your assumption. Choose boldly. Persist quietly. Hold the end with unwavering conviction. When your inner world becomes unshakable, life has no choice. It must rise to meet the truth you have accepted.